Welcome back. This is Chapter 22, Reproductive System. The male and female reproductive system are connected sets of organs and glands. Some of these organs and glands will secrete hormones to regulate the processes and as well as develop and maintain secondary sexual characteristics. Reproductive organs produce and nurture sex cells and transport them to the site of fertilization. We'll start with the male. The functions of the male reproductive system: develop and maintain male sex cells, which are called sperm, transport sperm and fluids to the outside of the body, as well as to synthesize male sex hormones. The primary sex organ, or gonad, is the testes. There are two, in which sperm cells, or spermatozoa, as well as the male sex hormones are produced. And all the other organs and structures in the male reproductive system are called accessory sex organs. Here's an image of the male reproductive system. The testes is external. It is suspended from the body by the spermatic cord, which lies within this sac of skin called the scrotum. The spermatic cord isn't really pointed out in this picture, but it's part of ligaments and tissue that suspends the testes in the scrotum. The testes, again, are the primary sex organs. Everything else is considered an accessory. So looking at the testes, here's a picture that gives us a good image of it. The very outside part of it is a tough fibrous capsule called the tunica albuginea. Inside of the testes are little compartments called lobules. There's about 250 of them, and they're separated by a connective tissue septa. Let's go back. Here you can see how you have separate little rooms or chambers. Those are the lobules. Inside of there is that tubing called seminiferous tubules. It's a really highly coiled tubule. It is lined with specialized stratified epithelium containing spermatogenic cells, which basically give rise to sperm cells. You also have interstitial cells that lie between the seminiferous tubules that produce and secrete sex hormones. Here's another image of it. You can see the tunica albuginea is the white capsule, the lobules with the seminiferous tubules in there. Now, sperm is formed through some cells. The testicular or Sertoli cells are large cells that span the entire thickness of the epithelium of the seminiferous tubule, which support and nourish spermatogenic cells throughout their development into sperm. Now, you won't necessarily have to know all these steps, but spermatogonia through some steps would lead to spermatozoa or sperm. You have cell division here called meiosis. This is reducing the number of chromosomes in each cell by half, so that when it fertilizes with an egg, you have an equal number. Spermiogenesis is the development of a spermatid into sperm. A spermatogenesis is combined process of meiosis and spermiogenesis. The sperm cell itself is a tiny tadpole-shaped structure. There's a head, which the nucleus contains 23 chromosomes. On top of it is an acrosome, which is a cap This has enzymes in it that will help penetrate layers of the oocyte, or the egg cell, for fertilization. In the middle is the power from the mitochondria, and then the tail, or the flagellum, which propels it to move it. There's an image of it. Now, outside of the testes, we have the next structure called the epididymis, which is here. It's a coiled mass that's on top of the testes, and then a tubular structure comes off of that called the ductus deferens. The epididymis is narrow, tightly coiled on top of each testes. It promotes maturation, or maturing, of the sperm cells here. It's lined with pseudostratified columnar epithelium with non-motile cilia. Then our vas deferens, or ductus deferens, is that muscular tube that is part of the spermatic cord. It extends from the epididymis to the ejaculatory duct. It's lined with pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So back to this picture, we see the epididymis, then the tubing is the vas deferens, or the ductus deferens, and then we get to the first gland here called the seminal vesicles. There's two of them. Each is attached to the ductus deferens near the base of the urinary bladder. Excuse me. It secretes an alkaline fluid which regulates the pH in the male and female tracts. It secretes a fructose and prostaglandins, and it connects empty into the its contents empty into the ejaculatory duct. So here's your seminal vesicle, and this is the ejaculatory duct, this tiny little spot. This contributes most to the volume of semen. The prostate gland is next. It surrounds the proximal portion of the urethra. It lies just inferior to the urinary bladder. The ducts of the gland open into the urethra. It's composed of the tubular glands in connective tissue. It has some smooth muscle as well. It secretes a thin, milky alkaline fluid. Its secretions enhance sperm motility, and it contributes to the volume of semen. Here, this yellow circle is the prostate gland. It's the only one that's not a paired gland, and it has a urethra going right through it. Below that is the bulbal urethra gland. There's a pair, and they're inferior to the prostate gland. They secrete a mucus-like fluid that helps with sexual stimulation and lubrication. It helps lubricate the end of the penis. Semen is the fluid the urethra will convey to the outside of the body during ejaculation. Contains sperm as well as other secretions. The secretions are coming from the seminal vesicle, prostate gland, and bulbal urethra gland. It's slightly alkaline. It contains prostaglandins, nutrients, and the volume is interesting, 2 to 5 milliliters. But what's more fascinating is how many sperm are in per milliliter. 120 million sperm per milliliter of semen. That's a lot of sperm. They begin to swim as they mix with secretions of the accessory glands. Some of the external organs now, the scrotum, which is that skin and adipose as well as muscle, which encases the testes, and then the penis is our other external organ. The scrotum is a skin and subcutaneous tissue behind the penis. This subcutaneous tissue lacks fat. There's a muscle in it called dartos muscle, and this contracts and relaxes in response to temperature changes. The purpose of that is to keep the testes at an optimal temperature for sperm production and survival. It has to be lower than body temperature, otherwise sperm won't survive. There's a septum dividing the scrotum into 2 chambers. Each chamber is lined with serous membrane, and each chamber houses a testicle, or testes, and epididymis. Now the penis is the other external reproductive organ. It's going to convey urine and semen through the urethra to the outside of the body. It's specialized to become erect for insertion into the vagina during sexual intercourse. The shaft or the body contains 3 columns of erectile tissue, 2 corpus cavernosum and 1 corpus spongiosum, which is where your urethra is. The end of it has the glans penis. It's a distal enlargement of the corpus spongiosum. And on the end of the penis is the prepuce or the foreskin, which covers the glans penis. And if a boy has been circumcised, this is surgically removed. Here we can see an image. It's a cross section. Here's the corpus cavernosum, the 2 chambers there, and then the spongiosum with the urethra in the middle. The cavernosum is what fills up with blood to give an erection. Moving on to female. The female organs are specialized for reproduction. They produce female sex egg cells called oocytes, transports the oocytes to the site of fertilization, tries to provide a favorable environment for developing an offspring, and then transports the offspring to the outside of the body, as well as produces female sex hormones. The primary female sex organ are the ovaries. All of the other parts are secondary or accessory. Ovaries, there are 2 of them. They're solid, oval shaped. They lie in the lateral wall of the pelvic cavity. There are a lot of ligaments involved in the ovary and the uterus. The broad ligament is the largest ligament. It holds each ovary in place and is also attached to the uterine tube in the uterus. The suspensory ligament holds the ovary in the upper end, and the ovarian ligament is a round cord-like thickening of broad ligament, which attaches the lower end of the ovary to the uterus. Here's a really good picture of those, showing us the ovaries here with the ovarian ligaments, suspensory ligament, broad ligament. The tissue of an ovary can be divided into an inner medulla and outer cortex. The ovarian medulla is composed of loose connective tissue and many blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerve fibers. The ovarian cortex consists of more compact tissue, has a granular appearance, 2 to tiny masses of cells called ovarian follicles, and the egg cells will develop inside these follicles. The internal accessory reproductive organs of the female are the uterine tubes, uterus, and the vagina. The uterine tubes, also called fallopian tubes or oviducts. They're a tubular organ that transports ovulating egg cells from the ovary to the uterus. The end near the ovary is a funnel-shaped infundibulum with some finger-like projections called fimbriae. The fimbriae lie in close proximity to the ovary so that they can pick up the ovulating egg cell. Uterine tubes are mucosa-lined with cilia, which aid in transport of egg down the uterine tube. And fertilization is happening here in the uterine tube. The uterus is hollow, muscular, pear-shaped organ. It receives the embryo and sustains its development. It's attached to the pelvic wall by the broad ligament and round ligament. The body is the upper 2/3. The top is called the fundus, and then the bottom third is the neck or the cervix. That partially extends into the upper vagina. There are 3 layers of the uterine wall. The very outside is called the periometrium. It's a serosa layer. Myometrium is a muscle layer. And then the very inside is the endometrium, or a mucosa layer. The vagina is a fibromuscular tube that runs between the uterus and outside of the body, conveys uterine secretions, receives the penis during intercourse, and provides a passageway for offspring during birth. It surrounds the end of the cervix. And the fornicis is a recessed area between the upper vaginal wall and the cervix. And the vaginal orifice is partially enclosed. The vaginal orifice is the whole of the vagina, but it's partially enclosed by a thin connective tissue and epithelial layer called hymen. There are 3 walls of the vagina: the inner mucosa layer of stratified squamous epithelium, a middle muscular layer, and an outer fibrous layer. The female external reproductive organs surround the opening of the urethra and vagina and is known as the vulva. The organs include the labia majora, labia minora, clitoris, and vestibular glands. The labia majora is a rounded fold of adipose tissue and skin. It encloses and protects the other external reproductive organs. It merges to form a rounded elevation over the symphysis pubis called the mons pubis. Labia minora is a flattened longitudinal fold between the labia majora. It has a lot of blood supply. At the anterior end, they form a hood-like covering around the clitoris. The clitoris is a small projection between the labia minora at the anterior end of the vulva. It corresponds to the male penis, composed of 2 columns of erectile tissue. The vestibule. Vestibule is a space, and it's between the labia minora and that encloses the vagina and the urethral openings. The vestibular glands secrete mucus into the vestibule during sexual stimulation. Mammary glands are often forgotten when we talk about female reproductive system, but they're important. They're there. Their job is to secrete milk following pregnancy to nourish the baby. They are located in the subcutaneous tissue of the anterior thorax within the breasts. The nipple of each breast is surrounded by a circular area of pigmented skin called the areola. A mammary gland is composed of 15 to 20 irregular shaped lobes. Each lobe contains alveolar glands drained by alveolar ducts, which drain into lactiferous duct that leads to the nipple and the open to the outside. Dense strands of connective tissue form suspensory ligaments that will support the breast. The mammary glands of male and female are similar. As puberty is reached, ovarian hormones stimulate development of the mammary glands in females.